Let's have an honest conversation about how your genetics affect your success with women and in life in general. And as always, my basis for this is going to be evolutionary psychology. I'm going to be putting forth my personal argument for the existence of a loser gene or loser epigenetic programming. Why it exists, how it is passed down, how to reverse it, etc. Now, as I go on with this, I'll be forced to make some bold assertions. Assertions that will come in handy later. Agreed? Okay, let's go. Now, whenever anyone mentions the word genetics, the first thing that comes to mind for most people is physical traits or looks. And while that is valid, your physical traits are passed down to you, they're only one half of what is passed down to you genetically. The other half, and frankly, the more important half, are your behavioral cues. And they're more important as far as attracting women goes, because that is what women have evolved to look out for. Your decision making, and more specifically your propensity for certain kinds of action and decision making, act as signals or indicators of the presence of a man that would be beneficial for her to align with on an evolutionary level. Obviously, she isn't thinking about all this consciously, but you get the point. Needless to say, stronger, more assertive, more dominant, more aggressive type of men have more success with women over their more timid and shy counterparts, but I digress. In his book Sperm Wars, Dr. Robin Baker talks extensively about the correlation between behavioral cues and reproduction. He also talks about the role aggression and assertiveness plays in sexual competition. The point I'm trying to make is your behavior has a profound effect on your success with women and life in general. Not to say that looks don't play a role or don't matter at all, but the science is clear on it. Even the things that are seen as attractive look-wise are really just things that indicate the presence or the propensity for certain actions and behaviors. Ultimately, your looks, your angles, your symmetry, all that all point back to your behavioral cues anyway. Now, you're probably saying, Jace, that makes no fucking sense. If my looks are my genetics and I got those at birth, how the hell is that an indicator of the way I behave right now? Well, it all starts with correcting that first misconception you have, because contrary to popular belief, your looks aren't your genetics. Your aesthetics, or your looks as we call them today, are what are classified under genetic expression. Basically, the way your latent genes that were passed down to you are currently expressed. Please, please, please do not confuse your genetic potential with your genetic expression. They are not the same thing. To give you a simple example, just because someone's father is 6'4" doesn't guarantee that they too will grow to 6'4". And in the same way, just because your dad is 5'7" doesn't mean that that is the extent of your genetic potential. There are many, many factors that affect your genetic expression because of how epigenetic programming works. Epigenetic programming is a process that controls gene expression and translation and is influenced by exposure to certain conditions during critical periods of early life. There's your genetic potential, or your building blocks, and then your genetic expression, as in how much of that genetic potential you actually reach. So you're not really physically unappealing or ugly. You just never reached your genetic potential. You see how in that second half where it says that your epigenetic programming is influenced by the exposure to certain conditions during critical periods of early life? The most crucial period of development by far for any man remains puberty. Your development during these formative years quite literally affects the rest of your life in ways you cannot imagine. From the creation of neural pathways to the secretion of certain important growth hormones like testosterone, and even the impact on the limbic and reptilian brain. Puberty cannot be overstated enough. The more successful your puberty, the better your genetic expression overall. And then the better your genetic expression, the better feedback you get from your environment and other organisms in your environment, which in turn helps you to subconsciously develop behavioral cues that are attractive. Now, you're probably saying, Jace, you just talked in circles. What's going on? If puberty affects your looks and looks affects your behavioral cues overall, then wouldn't that place more emphasis on your looks and your behavioral cues? Abso-fucking-lutely not. And here's why. The success of your puberty comes down to your behavioral cues. Remember that term we just talked about, epigenetic programming? It was popularized by a man named C.H. Waddington. In his book, The Strategy of Genes, he discusses how certain gene actions, as he put them, are either filtered out or added in by our limbic and reptilian brain as we interact with other organisms within our environment and our environment itself. Through countless experiments, he essentially confirmed not just the theory of brain elasticity, but also the fact that our behavioral genetic traits are changed by the way we interact with our environment. According to Dr. Waddington, if your genetic expression is not up to par after puberty, because the environment you developed in during your formative years was not challenging enough and did not put a heavy enough workload on you, and as a result, your body did not feel the need to achieve its highest genetic potential for its own survival. Now, not only do I believe that, but I'm gonna help Dr. Waddington say the silent part out loud. If your genetic expression after puberty is subpar, then not only was the environment you developed in not challenging enough, but you also didn't do anything to seek any challenges within said environment. And just like that, we're right back to epigenetic programming and behavioral cues. Because even before puberty, we can all agree that certain children have a higher propensity for risk-taking than others. So now where does that come from? Well, short answer, your ancestors. Well, more like a combination of your ancestors, the environment they were growing up in, and then your environment as well. Because believe it or not, there's a good chance you've adopted your ancestors' mating strategies without even realizing. You see, your brain is split into three different parts: the neocortex, the limbic brain, and your reptilian brain. For the sake of what we're talking about right now, we're just going to focus mostly on the limbic and the reptilian brains, okay? For simplicity's sake, let's say the limbic brain is the emotional center of your brain, and your reptilian brain is the compulsive or instinctual center of your brain. You can also think of them as the offensive and the defensive parts of your brain when it comes to decision making. One side, the reptilian side, is action oriented, while the limbic side is more concerned with the consequences and more specifically, the feelings that you get from the consequences of actions. These two centers of your brain are constantly at war with each other when it comes to your decision making. They never truly agree, so only one can win with every decision you make. Whichever one beats out the other, it sends a signal to your neocortex to find a way to rationalize that decision. That's what your neocortex is for. Again, this isn't actually how they work exactly, but I'm just keeping it very simple. Following so far? So to put it very simply, what creates what we call your personality or your mating strategy is essentially which one of these brains wins out more than the other. So the more times your reptilian brain wins and you are more instinctual, more primal, you do hard stuff, you're assertive, you're aggressive. Assuming you interpret the way people within your environment treat you after behaving that instinctually as good, then it leaves a significant impact in the entirety of your central nervous system and lets it know, hey, this is a winning strategy for surviving and replicating in this environment. The more I let the reptilian brain take over and we're more assertive, more dominant, more aggressive, the higher our chance of survival and replication. But let's say you allow your reptilian brain take over, you're more assertive, more dominant, more instinctual, your environment pushes back and you don't actually interpret that as a good thing or a winning strategy. Then that too leaves a significant impact on your central nervous system, letting it know, hey, the last time we allowed our reptilian brain go crazy, bad things happen. That is not a winning strategy. Oh, yo, limbic system, you're up. Now here's the scary part. The propensity to allow one of those brains lead over the other more times than not is a trait that is passed down genetically. So if as a man you're not as instinctual or compulsive or aggressive or dominant or assertive, there's a good chance that your ancestors weren't the ones fighting lions with their bare hands. There's a good chance your ancestors did not see the value in aggressive behavior, so they blended into the crowd, the environment, and flew under the radar for their own survival. If you find yourself being more dominant and assertive, then there's a very good chance your ancestors were the same way and saw value in that. And that's my argument for why I believe the loser gene exists. Because through years of epigenetic programming, most men are just more limbic brain than reptilian. Now, the good news is there's actually a way to become far more assertive in a very short period of time. And that is by doing what your ancestors didn't have the balls to do and actually fight the lion. Okay, maybe not physically, literally fight a lion, but do hard things that scare you. And do them so well and so often that you allow it to change your brain chemistry. It will require you to change and reinterpret a lot of the beliefs you currently have around danger and hardship. But doing this can not only save you, but quite literally future generations unborn. And sure, you might be hearing this a little too late to change your genetic expression, but it's fine. Like I said before, what matters more is your actual behavioral cues. That's the whole point of genetic expression anyway. So there it is, the scientific reason you should become a fucking badass. Do with all this information what you must. Boy, you gotta tell them to do with this information what they must. Oh yeah, one more thing. October 1st, mark the date.